My name is Lauren Mitchell, and for as long as I can remember, I have lived under the shadow of someone who never missed a chance to comment on my body. She called me heavy, or joked that I looked wider in certain outfits, yet every time I reacted, she insisted it was harmless fun and that I was simply too sensitive for my own good. I kept trying to believe her because believing her felt easier than admitting how deeply her words cut into me. For years, I told myself it would get better if I stayed quiet. I convinced myself that the teasing would fade once we grew older. Instead, it sharpened, turning into little remarks that followed me through birthdays, family gatherings, and even quick visits. I tried to brush it off, but something inside me finally shifted the day I saw a series of messages she never meant for me to read. The way she spoke about people who trusted her revealed a side of her that I had never wanted to imagine, and buried within those lines was a comment about me that took away whatever hesitation I had left. I knew I had to stop pretending nothing was wrong, so I made a decision that would change everything between us. I posted the screenshots on my own page and tagged her without a second thought. When she saw it, her reaction told me that what came next would not be simple. If you want to hear how everything unfolded after that moment, stay with me, share your thoughts later, and let me know what you would have done in my place. Growing up, everything seemed to start earlier than I ever understood. I learned quickly that my sister was the one people praised without hesitation, while I was the one relatives compared in ways that never felt gentle. When my sister Megan arrived at any family gathering, compliments followed her instantly, and I always stood beside her hearing the subtle remarks about how different we looked. The comments were never directed at her in a negative way, yet they always landed on me in a tone that forced me to shrink a little more each year. Megan had the kind of confidence that filled a room without effort, and I wanted to believe she used her brightness to pull me closer. Instead, she used that confidence to point out every detail she knew I struggled with, especially when it came to the way I looked. She tugged at the sleeves of my shirts when they fit awkwardly and laughed about how I should try something more flattering before pushing me toward a mirror that reflected every insecurity I had not yet learned to hide. When I brushed my hair in the mornings, she commented on how it never stayed smooth. When I tried a new outfit, she insisted my hips looked wider. Each remark was wrapped in a tone she described as playful, which made it harder to defend myself without being accused of overreacting. My mother loved Megan's energy and often told me that sisters teased each other for fun. Mom insisted I needed to loosen up because being sensitive would only make me miserable later in life. I hoped she was right, although a quiet part of me wished she would tell Megan to stop turning my insecurities into entertainment. Mom rarely corrected her, and I learned that silence was the easiest way to keep peace in the house, even when that silence made me feel invisible. The moment that shaped everything came during a large family birthday celebration when I was 13. It was held at my aunt's house, and the living room was crowded with relatives I barely spoke to. When it was time for pictures, someone asked Megan and me to stand together. Instead of simply posing, she nudged me forward and joked loudly that I should stand in the back because my face was rounder and might take up the entire frame. The laughter that followed felt like a spotlight burning through me, and all I could do was smile faintly so no one would accuse me of being dramatic. That night, I cried in the bathroom without making a sound, because crying publicly would have given Megan another opportunity to say I was too emotional. From that day on, I became hyper-aware of how my body moved, how my clothes fit, and how people might perceive me. At school, I struggled to join conversations because I worried about saying something wrong or drawing attention to myself. I never experienced betrayal from a close friend like the stories I later read about, but loneliness grew naturally from the fear that anyone who got close might see the flaws Megan kept pointing out. I kept to myself, hoping that being quiet would make the world softer, even though it only amplified the parts of me I wished I could change. Over time, I realized Megan and I had never truly been close, no matter how much I tried to believe we were simply different. The bond I imagined was something I had created because I wanted it to exist, not because it ever had. Understanding that truth was painful, yet it explained why her words stayed with me longer than they should have. I finally recognized that whatever I thought sisterhood should be had drifted far from what I actually lived through, and acknowledging that was the first step toward understanding how deeply our relationship had fractured long before adulthood arrived. Many years later, when I had finally moved to Chicago, I thought distance would soften the weight of everything I had carried from my childhood. Yet the insecurities I tried to outrun settled quietly into the corners of my new life. I built a routine that looked healthy from the outside and spent my days working as an assistant at a marketing firm where no one knew how fragile my confidence still was. The city gave me space to breathe, but it never fully erased the voice inside me that questioned every choice I made, especially the ones that involved being seen by others. Megan had grown into someone who adored attention to a degree that surprised even the people who admired her. She posted daily videos of her outfits, gym sessions, brunch plates, and long captions about confidence that sounded inspirational until you knew the way she spoke behind closed doors. Her favorite habit was posting vague stories whenever she wanted to embarrass someone without naming them, and although she never wrote my name, I recognized myself in several of those posts. She once added a picture of a crowded dressing room with a caption about people who refuse to dress for their body type, and I felt the familiar sting of humiliation, even though she lived in another state. The last time we met was during a work event where a colleague introduced me to a group of clients, and Megan happened to stop by after visiting a friend nearby. She greeted everyone with her usual confidence, then turned to me with a smile that felt rehearsed. In front of the group, she commented that I had always been too shy to keep up with her energy, which made the clients laugh, despite not understanding the remark fully. I felt a sharp discomfort in my chest, because her tone carried the same familiar edge, and I knew she intended it as a reminder of where she thought I belonged in relation to her. Mom believed Megan meant well and told me not to take everything so seriously. Dad insisted siblings teased each other at every age, which made me feel frustrated in a way I struggled to explain. Their dismissal created a distance that felt heavier than any argument could, and I slowly realized I had no safe space to talk about how painful Megan's behavior was. When I tried to explain that her comments were not harmless jokes, Mom reminded me that Megan had always been expressive and that I needed to understand her personality better. I wondered why understanding only needed to go in one direction, and the thought lingered long after our conversation ended. Her behavior online became more pointed over time. She posted a video about people who seek validation through silence, and although the description was vague, I could tell she was referring to my tendency to withdraw whenever she made me uncomfortable. She posted motivational quotes about taking control of your narrative, while simultaneously shaping the narrative of mine in ways that made me appear timid or insecure. I tried ignoring them, yet each post felt like she was tightening an invisible grip around my self-esteem, making it harder to convince myself that she would ever treat me with respect. The moment that made everything click happened during a weekend when she posted a picture of a childhood photo album. She wrote a caption about how some people never grow out of their awkward phases, and while she used a laughing emoji to soften the tone, I recognized the picture immediately because it was taken on the night of the family birthday celebration that had haunted me for years. Seeing her turn that moment into entertainment for strangers brought a bitter clarity I could no longer push aside, and I understood that the distance between us had become something I could not ignore any longer. One late weekend evening when I stopped by Megan's house, I expected nothing more complicated than picking up a small box my mom needed for the following morning. The house felt unusually quiet when I stepped inside, and Megan called out from the kitchen that I could grab the box from her office downstairs. I walked toward the room, still thinking about my plans for the next day, unaware that something far heavier than the box was waiting for me on her desk. Her phone buzzed the moment I reached for the drawer, and the screen lit up with a group chat notification. Megan usually kept her phone close, so seeing it lying there felt strange. The message preview flashed with a string of laughing emojis followed by a comment that pulled my attention before I could remind myself to look away. I tried to respect her privacy, yet the first line sat so openly on the screen that it felt impossible to ignore. The comment came from her friend Ava, who always struck me as warm and accommodating whenever we crossed paths. She had written a joke about one of Megan's coworkers, Jenna, and Megan replied with a longer message that grew more vicious with each passing sentence. Her tone held a level of contempt I could hardly reconcile with the polished image she displayed online. I knew siblings occasionally vented about others, but the glee in her words unsettled me. Then the chat continued to scroll as more notifications piled on top of each other and the mood shifted from unpleasant to cutting. A new comment popped up with my name spelled out in full. My breath caught as I read the line that followed. Megan had written a remark so blunt it felt like a slap, describing me in terms that weaponized every insecurity I had ever carried. She mocked the way I dressed and repeated a nickname she used when we were children, turning it into a punchline for Ava and Jenna to enjoy. Their laughing reactions appeared one after another, creating a stream of responses that made my stomach twist. I stood frozen beside her desk, unable to process how casually she dismantled me in front of people who barely knew me. The longer I stared at the screen, the deeper the shame settled into my chest. I wondered how many times she had used me as entertainment when I was not around. The hurt came not only from her insults, but from the realization that she had never outgrown the habit of treating me as someone she could belittle without consequence. I felt foolish for believing adulthood might have softened her judgment. Instead, she simply found new platforms to sharpen it. For a moment, I debated putting the phone down and walking away. My hand hovered over the drawer and every part of me urged caution, because I knew crossing this line would consume the fragile peace I still tried to maintain. Yet something about the cruelty of her words pushed me past the hesitation I once mistook for maturity. I lifted the phone long enough to scroll through the earlier messages, confirming that this was not a single lapse, but a pattern. When another cruel comment about my appearance appeared, my decision formed with quiet finality. I opened the camera and took several screenshots, steadying my breathing as I captured each thread. My hands trembled slightly when I set the phone back and closed the drawer. Nothing in the room had changed, although everything within me felt rearranged. I carried the box upstairs, thanked Megan through the doorway, and walked to my car with a calmness I did not fully understand. The night air had a sharpness that kept me grounded as I drove home, replaying her messages in my mind with a mixture of disappointment and clarity. When I reached my apartment, I placed the box on the counter and sat alone in the dim light of my living room. The screenshots remained open on my phone, and the longer I looked at them, the more certain I became that hiding the truth only protected someone who had never protected me. I opened Facebook, selected the images, and wrote a short caption that stated, "I could no longer pretend." I tagged Megan before posting, then watched the screen shift as the notifications began their steady climb. Within minutes, my post spread beyond my usual circle, drawing reactions from people who recognized Megan from her constant online presence. Comments poured in as others questioned her behavior or expressed their shock at the contrast between her public persona and the unfiltered cruelty captured in the screenshots. I turned my phone face down, listening to the quiet hum of the room, while a feeling I had not anticipated settled deep inside me. It was not triumph or satisfaction, but something far simpler: relief. The next morning, my phone began ringing before the sun had fully risen, and the vibration echoed through my apartment with an urgency that made my pulse tighten. I recognized Megan's name immediately, and the moment I answered, her voice exploded through the speaker with a pitch sharp enough to jolt me upright. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing, insisting that the screenshots had been altered and that I had twisted her conversations to humiliate her on purpose. She spoke in rapid bursts that left no room for thought, and every sentence carried an anger that made it clear she had spent the entire night reading the comments building beneath my post. I tried to respond with calm, yet she refused to hear a single word and accused me of betraying her out of jealousy. Her insistence that she had done nothing wrong created a disconnect that felt almost surreal. Before I could gather my thoughts, another call came in from my mom, who sounded distressed in a way that suggested she had already taken Megan's side. She urged me to take the post down because it was embarrassing for the family, and she insisted that siblings argued all the time. She claimed I had blown everything out of proportion, and that Megan had simply been venting the way many people did with their friends. I listened in silence as she repeated those lines with an unwavering certainty, and the more she talked, the smaller I felt. She never acknowledged the content of the messages or the cruelty behind them, and instead focused on the public nature of my actions, as if privacy mattered more than integrity. I waited for a moment of understanding that never arrived. The situation spiraled faster than anyone expected, because my post had reached more people than Megan had prepared for. Texts from Ava appeared shortly afterward because she had been confronted by several people who recognized her in the messages and demanded explanations. She messaged me once in a panicked tone, insisting she had not meant anything serious, though her reaction suggested she knew her words had carried more weight than she wanted to admit. When I refreshed my feed, I noticed that some of her friends had already commented beneath my post, calling out the behavior they had witnessed from her in the past. It became clear that the image she had tried to maintain had cracked. Shortly after that, a message arrived from Jenna, whose reaction held more disbelief than anger. She apologized for her involvement, even though the messages had not originated from her. She wrote that the remarks Megan had made about her were painful to read and that she was reevaluating their relationship. She thanked me for unintentionally exposing a truth she would never have discovered otherwise. Her message stood out because it was the first acknowledgement from anyone in that circle that what had been said was genuinely wrong. While I tried to process everything, Megan's boyfriend Liam reached out with a long message written at 3 in the morning. It was the first time he had ever contacted me directly, and the emotion in his words revealed how shaken he felt. He admitted that seeing the group chat had made him realize there were sides of Megan he had ignored for far too long. His disappointment radiated from every sentence, and he confessed that he needed space to consider what their relationship meant if she could speak that way about the people closest to her. I sensed that whatever he decided would change things for them in a way Megan had not anticipated. As the morning unfolded, Megan continued sending messages that shifted from anger to denial, and then to accusations that I had always resented her. She claimed that my post came from envy, and that she had only been joking when she made comments about me. She never acknowledged the extent of the harm and instead focused on portraying herself as the victim. My dad called eventually, and his tone attempted neutrality. He encouraged me to delete the post because he believed the situation would settle down if I stepped back. He suggested that family issues should remain private, and the casual tone he used felt strangely disconnected from the impact the messages had on my confidence for years. I listened to each call and message with a growing sense of detachment. The reactions revealed how deeply fractured our relationships had become, and the more they spoke, the clearer it became that my decision to expose the truth had uncovered issues far older than the screenshots themselves. By the time my phone finally stopped buzzing, I realized that whatever remained between Megan and me had crossed a line that could not be reversed. A few days later, our relatives were asked to meet at my parents' house for what they called a family discussion. I arrived with a strange sense of calm feeling, as though the storm had already passed for me, while everyone else was just beginning to experience it. Megan sat in the center of the living room with red eyes that suggested hours of rehearsed tears, and Mom hovered beside her with a tight expression that hinted at judgment rather than concern. The room held an uneasy silence until Dad asked me to sit so they could begin. Megan spoke first with a trembling voice that did not sound natural. She claimed I had humiliated her without reason and insisted the messages were taken out of context. She said she had always supported me and portrayed the situation as a misunderstanding created by outsiders who wanted to damage our relationship. The attention she placed on her own distress felt overwhelming, yet I stayed quiet to let her speak, because I wanted everyone to hear how far she would stretch her version of the truth. When she finally paused, Dad asked if I had anything to say. I explained that my post was not an impulsive attack, but the result of years filled with comments that undermined my confidence. I spoke about the times she criticized my body, the countless moments she reduced my insecurities to jokes, and the many situations where I pretended not to notice her mockery. My voice did not shake despite the heaviness of the memories, and I described how deeply her words had shaped the way I saw myself. Megan tried to interrupt several times, yet Dad told her to wait until I finished. Before the room could settle again, my Aunt Marlene stood up from the couch with a determination that surprised everyone. She said she had watched this dynamic for years and had stayed quiet out of respect for my parents, although she now realized her silence had protected the wrong person. She stated clearly that Megan had crossed lines long before the screenshots appeared, and that my reaction was not spiteful, but overdue. The directness in her tone cut through the tension, and Megan's expression shifted from wounded to angry the moment she realized she had lost control of the narrative. The atmosphere grew sharper when Liam cleared his throat. He said he had seen similar behavior from Megan in private and felt guilty for not speaking earlier. He did not expose everything yet. The small pieces he revealed were enough to cause the room to stir with discomfort. Megan's face tightened with alarm as everyone processed his words. She tried to dismiss him by calling it a betrayal, although her voice cracked in a way that hinted at fear rather than indignation. The conversation spiraled when Megan shouted that none of this would have happened if I were not so sensitive about my appearance. She said this with a bitterness that startled even her supporters, and the insult landed with a force that silenced the room completely. Mom placed a hand on her shoulder in an attempt to soften the moment, but the damage was already done. The shift in the atmosphere felt immediate because everyone understood that Megan had just exposed the part of herself she had worked so hard to hide. I stood up without waiting for anyone to respond. The realization that I no longer needed validation from people who refused to hear me created a sense of relief that steadied each step I took toward the door. No one tried to stop me as I walked outside, because they finally saw that my silence had never been consent. It had only been exhaustion, and I was done carrying it. 3 days after the family meeting, I woke with a quiet heaviness that felt different from the sadness I had carried for years. It no longer pressed down on me the way it once did, and instead settled with a clarity that made every thought feel sharper. I moved around my apartment in silence, aware that something inside me had shifted since the moment I walked out of that living room. The emotions that followed me through that day came in waves rather than in spirals, which made me realize I had finally reached the point where I could look at everything without flinching. As the morning unfolded, I replayed the patterns that had shaped my relationship with Megan. I thought about the early years when her comments were disguised as teasing, then the countless moments in adulthood when those remarks grew more pointed. The memories did not overwhelm me, as they usually did. Instead, they organized themselves into a sequence that showed how each wound had been dismissed for the sake of peace. Seeing those years in order revealed how deeply I had underestimated the damage of staying silent, and the realization made the decision I had been avoiding feel undeniable. I opened my phone and left the family group chat without hesitation. The small click of the exit button brought an unexpected sense of relief, as though a room that had been crowded for too long finally gained space to breathe. I walked to my desk and began gathering the documents I still kept for convenience, sorting them into folders so I could place them out of sight. It felt symbolic to clear the remnants of a connection that had never offered the safety I pretended existed. A single line formed in my mind, steady and direct, and I sent it to Megan without giving her time to weaponize the silence between us. I wrote that I had heard enough, that I would not tolerate further disrespect, and that I needed distance to protect myself. The message was concise because I wanted nothing from her in return, not even a final confrontation. Once it was delivered, I deleted our entire chat history because I no longer wished to revisit the version of myself who tried endlessly to earn basic kindness. I sat at my laptop and drafted an email to my parents. The words came slowly, at first shaped by the years I spent minimizing my experiences so they would not consider me dramatic. I explained how long I had endured Megan's comments and how deeply those remarks had affected my sense of self. I also wrote that I no longer felt responsible for maintaining a bond that relied on my silence. When I clicked send, I realized I had said everything I once feared they would refuse to hear. Tyler arrived that afternoon with groceries and a quiet understanding that felt more comforting than any reassurance. We talked briefly about the family meeting, and he listened with a focus that helped me stay grounded. When I mentioned the idea of moving to a different place, his response carried no hesitation. He offered to help me search for a new apartment and said he wanted me to have a space where my boundaries were respected without negotiation. His support made the transition feel less like an escape and more like a step towards something healthier. Predictably, Megan replied soon after with a message filled with accusations. She claimed I was abandoning her, insisted the screenshots misrepresented her intentions, and suggested that I had exaggerated my hurt to get attention. The familiar rhythm of her words no longer had an effect on me. I read the message, once recognized the pattern I had spent years enabling, and blocked her without a second thought. The act felt final in a way nothing else had. I blocked Mom and Dad as well, not out of anger, but because I needed a distance that allowed me to rebuild without the pressure of defending my choices. The only person I kept in contact with was Marlene, whose honesty had reminded me that I was not impossible to understand. She sent a short message saying she was proud of me, and her words settled gently where the hurt once lived. By the time evening arrived, the weight of the past felt lighter, and for the first time in years, the quiet around me did not feel like loneliness. It felt like room to breathe. A month after the decision to cut ties, a quiet steadiness shaped my days in a way I had not known before, and the shift felt almost unreal as I eased into a rhythm that finally belonged to me. Each morning began with the same slow breath that my therapist taught me during our first session, and the simple routine grounded me enough to soften the noise I once carried in my mind. Therapy became a place where I explored the reasons I had tolerated so much hurt for so many years, and the process allowed me to unlearn the reflex of blaming myself whenever someone else acted cruelly. The work was painful in moments, yet every breakthrough added another layer of clarity that I had needed for far too long. Meanwhile, the fallout around Megan unfolded quickly. Friends who had once filled her evenings with plans now demanded explanations for the things she had said about them, and many chose to step away altogether when they realized her apologies never matched her actions. Her online presence shifted from polished confidence to scattered attempts at justification that only highlighted the depth of the damage. When Tyler ended their relationship, the split created ripples she could not control, and the image she guarded so fiercely began to crumble. I observed all of this from a distance without a trace of satisfaction, because the consequences belonged to her choices rather than to anything I had done. My parents reached out several times, confused by the silence that settled over our family. Their messages hovered between worry and subtle pressure, but I kept my boundaries firm. I explained in one final email that I needed distance to heal, and any chance at rebuilding would require accountability that they had never been willing to show. The disappointment in their reply was familiar, although it no longer had the power to steer my decisions. For the first time, I chose my well-being over the comfort of maintaining appearances, and the choice felt undeniably right. Moving into my new apartment marked another quiet victory. The space was small, filled with warm light during the afternoon, and the simplicity offered peace I had not known since childhood. I unpacked my things, slowly placing each item where it felt purposeful rather than obligatory. Marlene visited one weekend to help set up my bookshelves, and her presence reminded me that family could exist without pain attached to it. She never tried to convince me to return to the dynamic I left behind, and her support helped me trust that separating myself was not an act of cruelty, but an act of survival. Work improved as well once the weight of constant tension no longer followed me. I approached tasks with a clearer mind and spoke up during meetings with confidence I had forgotten I possessed. My coworkers noticed the shift, though none of them knew its origin, and their encouragement strengthened the sense of stability I cultivated each week. The absence of chaos revealed how much energy I had spent managing emotional wounds that were not mine to carry. On nights when I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I revisited the chain of events that led me here. Instead of regret, I found relief in knowing that I had finally honored my own limits. Megan continued to frame every loss as something I caused, yet her unwillingness to accept responsibility only reaffirmed why leaving had been necessary. Cutting ties did not erase the history between us, but it allowed me to choose peace over the endless cycle of hurt. As the month closed, I realized that my life no longer revolved around anticipating someone else's moods or bracing for another blow wrapped in a joke. What remained was a quieter life, built with intention, guided by the belief that protecting myself was not selfish. It was a beginning I had earned through every difficult step, and I stepped into it without hesitation. Learning to set boundaries became the turning point that allowed me to reclaim parts of myself I believed were permanently damaged. Stepping away from toxic family patterns helped me understand that loyalty should never require silence in the face of disrespect. Healing took patience, yet it taught me that choosing distance can be an act of courage rather than defiance. Peace grows when we stop shrinking to fit relationships that were never meant to hold us. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. Your time and attention mean more than I can express, and I appreciate every listener who creates space for stories like mine. I hope the journey resonated with you in some way, and I would love to hear your thoughts or experiences. Please feel free to share your perspective in the comments below.